So I'm going to be talking about unlocking growth by building and managing a team for your Squarespace business. Again, this is probably a little bit different to, everyone's got their own approach and probably the opposite of what Sam was saying. I'd love to get into it. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Perfect. So just as an introduction, my name is Dylan. I run a company called Winn-Brown and Co. I started freelancing at the age of about 15. Initially, it was just something on the side to try and make a bit of money. And I did some graphic design, video editing, and then found web design and really enjoyed the process of building websites and bringing together all the different assets that I'd, been working on previously as a freelancer into one place that anyone could basically access regardless of wherever they were or what device they were on. So I started building websites and built my first Squarespace site in 2016. At the time, I was building a lot of WordPress sites, like it sounds like a lot of us were. And I just fell in love with how easy Squarespace made the whole process of building a website. And, it takes away so much of the technical burden that you get when you're building like a WordPress site. So in 2019, I set up Winn-Brown and Co. as a web agency, web design, web development agency that specializes in Squarespace design and development. We do a lot of custom work and we do a lot of white label work for other agencies as well. And since then, I've kind of gone on a bit of a journey of hiring teams, firing them, hiring them again. So we're now today a fully remote team. We've grown from 3 to 7 in under a year. And I feel like I've learned a lot along the way about building teams and how to make that successful. Next slide, please. Cool. So this is, in short, a summary of why I built a team. I could relate a lot to those two graphics on the left-hand side there. And I basically realized that after I kind of got the amount of leads that I was getting in each month up to a certain point, all I was doing was, um, you know, wearing a million different hats within the business. I was constantly overwhelmed, working 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, probably just trying to operate the business. And I basically realized that what I'd created was a job for myself. I didn't really have a business, and I was spending time working in the business, not on the business. So I was doing a lot of tasks that I wasn't particularly interested in, bookkeeping or following up on overdue invoices, all that sort of stuff. And I wasn't getting any time to really focus my energy and efforts on things that were going to move the needle and push the business in the direction I wanted it to go in. Um, the whole reason as to why I got into business in the first place was to create something that would give me time freedom, location freedom, and financial freedom. And I would say that location freedom definitely and financial to an extent is possible with kind of the traditional freelance model, if you want to call it that. But you are never going to be free to, go on holiday and be away for 2 weeks, for example, without it having a significant impact on your time if your only deliverable and the only thing that you're really selling to clients is time. So I kind of knew in the back of my head that building a team was always the long-term solution, but I got it wrong definitely the first few times that I tried. Um, and yeah, like I said, I think along the way I learned a lot of lessons. So yeah, if we could just go on to the next slide. Um, Before you kind of jump straight into building a team, I think it's really important to consider whether building a team is right for you. Like I said, I tried it a few times before previously, and it definitely didn't work out sometimes. I think it depends a lot on where you are in your kind of journey, and it's probably different for every person. When I first started hiring or trying to hire and build a team, I jumped straight into hiring a web designer and web developer because I thought, I run a web design agency, so why wouldn't that be the first hire that I make? When in reality, at that time, I was enjoying the process of building websites and I thought I was pretty good at it, but I was spending time on tasks that actually I probably shouldn't have been doing and I wasn't very good at. So I think it's really important to consider whether you want to be spending your time, managing people, managing a team, and basically being that person in between your team and the client, or whether you want to be doing deliverable client-based work, because that's going to inform a lot about the way you go about building a team. And really, if you do at all, there's nothing wrong with keeping things really lean and simple and kind of going with the approach that Sam was talking about earlier. because there's definitely a lot of benefits to it. So I think it's really important to consider, the pros and cons before jumping straight into it. Next slide, please. Cool. So if you do decide to go ahead and build a team, and you think that you're kind of at the point where it makes sense, there's definitely a couple of learnings to take away, and ways that you can go about this so that you're doing it in a way that's sustainable and makes sense for you. And the first thing that I definitely learned along this journey was to not go with the traditional route of hiring someone who's, you're expecting them as a small business owner, like I showed in the first slide, you're used to doing sales, replying to emails, building websites, designing websites, maybe doing a bit of code, SEO. You're used to wearing a million hats. And it's very easy to kind of think that that person that you bring in should be able to do the same, when in reality, there's very few of those people around. Um, and so I think it makes a lot more sense to try and forget the concept and the idea of a role and a job role, especially when you're at a small, or you're at a relatively small stage of business, and instead think about the tasks that you're doing. So the way I approached this, and well, maybe the second or the third time around, the way that I approached this and got it a lot closer to getting it right, was to break down my workflow into a series of steps and tasks. So I looked at, my calendar over the past week or two, and really, looked at and analyzed where I was spending my time. And again, like Sam said, I wasn't probably spending 4 hours or 5 hours a day doing client work. I was probably spending a lot of time doing tasks that weren't revenue generating, I wasn't particularly good at. And so, really, those are the tasks that you want to outsource and delegate first. So, you can have a look at the chart on the right hand side, the matrix there. And basically, what this is a model for is the order in which you should delegate tasks. So, along the bottom, you've got passion. So, on one side, tasks that you love doing, and the other side, tasks that you hate doing. And then up the other axis, you've got ones about, you've got confidence. So how good are you at a task, or are you not great at it? According to this, and from my own experience, the tasks that you want to delegate first are the ones which you hate doing, and you're not very good at. So that might be bookkeeping. That's a common one that gets thrown around. It might be chasing up overdue invoices. These are tasks that you probably consume a lot more time than you think they do, but that you can relatively easily delegate and quickly free up time to then spend doing the things you do like doing. So whether that's client work, sales, whatever it may be, it gives you a little bit of that time back. Um, the second kind of bucket of tasks that you would want to be looking to delegate are the ones which you might be good at doing, but you hate doing. And so those are the ones that make, your day-to-day life a little bit more miserable than it could be. And you could be spending your time doing the tasks that you really enjoy. But because you're stuck doing tasks that, you know, don't really move the needle, but you're kind of doing, it holds you back. And like I said earlier, it stops you from doing the tasks that are going to move the needle and drive the growth in your business. Um, the third bucket is what's called pause and evaluate. So those are the tasks that you may really enjoy doing, but you're not actually very good at it. You may not be very efficient at it. And so those ones you want to just take a step back and have a think about, do I need to upskill? Do I need to invest in courses and lessons? How can I be better at these tasks, so that when I am doing them in the business, it's good for the business, and I'm not just doing it because I want to do it as like a hobby. Um, and those are probably tasks that you may end up delegating, you may end up upskilling and trying to improve yourself on. And then the fourth bucket are the tasks that you don't want to delegate. So these are basically your superpowers. If you want to think of it that way, they're the ones that you're most passionate about and that you're the best at. And those are the tasks you want to delegate last, or not at all, in fact. So if you have a look back at your time over the last, like I said, week or two, if you don't already track your time, use a time tracking app, or even just block the time on your calendar over the next week or two, and you'll get a pretty good idea of what you're doing between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. on a Wednesday. And quite quickly, you'll be able to see where your time's going. And then if you use this kind of matrix, you can start to kind of bucket all of these tasks and work out which ones make sense to delegate first. And what you will get from this is that it will allow you to hire people and bring in people onto your team that are specialists and not generalists. So you can bring in someone who's a bookkeeper, an expert at doing a particular function in your business that you don't want to be doing yourself. And it makes it a lot easier to go and find those people rather than trying to think of hiring one person who can design websites, reply to emails, do SEO, bit of coding, and basically be, wear all the hats. Yeah. Next slide, please. Cool. So if you do decide to build your team, and once you've kind of worked out which tasks you think it makes sense to delegate first, I think when you actually get to assembling a team, the first thing you want to really consider is whether you want to build a remote team or an in-person in-house team. I have done both before, and I think previously I hired someone in-house because I thought that that's what it looked like to have a proper business. This was pre-COVID, and I think a lot of the world and the thinking has changed since then. But there's definitely pros and cons to both approaches. But whatever decision you do take will drive a lot of the decisions that come into kind of the hiring process. And that brings me on to the second point, which is where to look for talent. So obviously, if you are wanting to hire in-house because you think you like the idea of, the collaboration that you'll have if you're in the same room as someone, um, you're a little bit more limited. And so you may need to use like LinkedIn, Indeed, I think I heard from before, Reed. There's all the kind of traditional job boards. Obviously, if you're hiring remote, you've got the world's talent on demand, and you can kind of go to specific places those specialists that I mentioned will hang out. So let's say you build websites, but you're not a huge fan of doing branding or the design work. You can go to places like Dribble, where you can find portfolios of designers that are really good, and you can kind of go straight into those ponds almost, if you think of it, that you can go and fish in, and that's where that talent hangs out. So that will inform your decision of where you want to look for the talent. And once you've kind of worked that out, you can start to think about creating an attractive offer. And this, I think, is something that's really important. And you see, really successful tech companies especially do this well. But thinking about how can you make a potential offer that you might make to someone as attractive as possible. Within my team and my company, that looks like giving a team flexible kind of working hours. I'm not super strict on them clocking in at 9 a.m. And logging off at 5 p.m. I give them a lot of creativity, freedom of creativity if they're working on client projects. But I think it's just important to take that time to think about the job role that you're offering from the potential employee's point of view, and to try and just make it as attractive as possible. What would you want if you were in their shoes? And that really leads to having a team that are going to stick around. They're going to go the extra mile for you. They're going to work that weekend if they really need to, if you need to get something over the line. And yeah, I think it's really important to make sure that what you're offering is attractive. In terms of the hiring process specifically, I think, again, when I first started hiring, I spent a lot of time doing it like the more traditional way and trying to interview people and test their skills. Whereas what I've actually learned is that if I'm hiring, let's say, for a web design role, and I've had a look at someone's portfolio, I know their work's pretty good from what I've seen already. The most important thing is just to firstly get on a quick 20, 30-minute call with them. And the point of that is not to test them for any skills that they may or may not have, but it's more just to think about whether they're a good fit for the company, and the role is going to be right for them. So I'm much more interested in just trying to understand the person, learn more about, yes, their experience and what they've done before, but also what they're interested in, how they like to work, and all of these kinds of questions, which aren't so, typical and standard, give you a much better insight into whether that person is going to be a good fit. If you think they are, the way that I hire always is to then just put them straight into a trial period. So rather than trying to spend, 3 or 4 rounds of interviews to find a perfect candidate, try them out. I typically will put someone on 2 to a 6-week trial, fully paid, to just see how they kind of slot into the business and whether it's a good fit. You're going to get a much better idea of how good someone is at working within your business and the kind of quality of output that they're able to deliver when they're actually working on live projects than if you're trying to test them beforehand. So that's kind of what's worked for me and the way I hire now. It's a little bit unconventional, but yeah, I think it's a new way of hiring, and especially when you've got a small company, it's a lot more effective to keep it very personal than super kind of test based. And then the final point about building a team that's I think is important in terms of getting that process right is the onboarding process. And this is really just about taking that extra bit of time to get someone's email set up on the day that they join so that they're coming into a team that they feel welcome. Make sure that you've got, if you don't already have a team and you don't have this in place, make sure that you've got and you've decided how you want to communicate with them. How are you going to manage projects? What does your communication kind of schedule look like? And this is going to be different for each team, each person. And, you know, well, that's one of the benefits of owning your own business is that you should be able to dictate all of this in a way that works for you, and then you can make sure that you build the team and the kind of culture that your team has around that. Yeah, next slide, please. Cool. So, in terms of like setting up for success, as I mentioned already, I think communication is key, and you've got to find what works for you. If you bring someone into your business, have a think beforehand about how you want to communicate with them. In my team, we have a weekly Monday call where we'll set out everyone in the team will be on that. We'll set out the priorities for the week ahead, and then we'll have a Friday call to basically review what we got done, and also to just discuss a couple of other things that may be going on. For example, we were talking about the run up to Circle Day and some of the talks that were going to be going on then. Um, so I think it's got to you've got to find what works for you. I know other companies that will have a daily 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. stand up with all of their team. I don't like to work that way. I like to have some of the freedom that I mentioned earlier on. So yeah, I think defining what communication looks like, making sure it works for you, and then getting all of the team to adhere to that is really important. Project management tools, again, I briefly mentioned this already, but you know, Slack and having chat apps works fine when you're a team of like one or two, maybe three. But the minute you start trying to scale and take on more than one project, or you've got multiple projects spinning, it does get really difficult to do that. So I would try and encourage you to put a project management tool in place. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be as simple as a Trello board. We use one called Toggle Plan, which is really basic, and it's basically just a list of Trello boards, very similar to that. You can use a Asana, like Krishna mentioned. There's so many options out there, but just again, there's no right option. So find something that's going to work for you, and don't overcomplicate it, I would say. And then I think planning. This is another really important thing when you've got a team. There's definitely a transition from being the person that's delivering all the client work into someone that's now responsible for a team and managing the workload that a team is taking on. You want to be on top of whether your team are, the workload that they've got, making sure that they're not burning out and overloaded with projects. And you also don't want them idle because, you're paying for their time at the end of the day. So I think you've got to really move into more of like an overseer and a manager role when you start to bring on a team, especially as that starts to grow. Because otherwise, you're just going to end up with one person sitting with no work to do and another one with three projects on that's burning out. Uh, Two last tips. So one of those would be feedback loops, and what I mean by that is speaking and checking in with your team regularly, even if you don't have a call with them every day. If they're working on a project, a client project, ask to see regular progress and give them feedback. So that I've found has been the best way of getting your team to do things the way that you want them done. I think a lot of people give up on hiring and building a team when they hire someone. They ask them to do a design project or build a website, and they're not happy with the outcome because they've kind of thrown a load of assets at a designer and then they've waited right up until they get a fully built website to have a look at it. I think if you can review the work as it's being done, like I said, it gives you more of a chance to build that rapport with your team. You build understanding, and you're going to end up with a better output at the end of the day. And that kind of leads me on to the final point, which is about continuous improvement and always be looking to improve the way that you're doing things for your team. When things start to work out, you don't want to just sit back and have the attitude of, okay, great, we're done now. I personally have a call with all of my team members. I try to do like every 6 to 8 weeks just to check in with them one-to-one, see how things are going, what I can be doing better to support their kind of career development and where they want to go, in life. And hopefully I can provide that as a manager. And also for them to be able to feedback anything that they might think we can be doing better in terms of processes. Because, at the end of the day, they're the ones that are probably doing most of the client work when you get to that point. So they are going to be the ones that are coming up with ideas and seeing inefficiencies. So I think having a kind of culture of continuous improvement and making your team feel comfortable and confident to be able to share any feedback with you is really important. Next slide. So to recap, from kind of start to finish, firstly, consider whether building a team is right for you. There's no right answer. Um, if you do want to build a team, forget traditional job roles and start thinking about tasks and crafting a persona of a specialist, someone who can take off your plate the tasks that you don't want to be doing, you're not very good at. Think about your offer and try and make it as attractive as possible. Put yourselves in the potential employee's shoes, and that's going to help with loyalty and reducing, lengthening how long people are going to stay with you after you've hired them, because you don't want to have to keep hiring it. It is a process, as you can see, that takes time. Welcome them on board and make sure that that process is as smooth as possible, and then talk to one another. Have, like I said, weekly calls or have constant feedback loops on projects so that you're sharing feedback and sharing thoughts and sharing ideas. Really encourage collaboration, and ask for feedback. Always be looking to improve and just try and be as open as possible. Yeah, that's it. I think there's one more slide. If you do want to connect, those are my details. You've got LinkedIn, my website, and Instagram. Um, and yeah, if anyone's got any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them when we get to the discussion part at the end of the presentation.